You can't be serious, Lucas. My voice trembled, my hands gripping the edges of the chair as I stared at him across his massive mahogany desk. My father, Vincent Calloway, leaned back in his leather chair, the weight of his authority pressing down on the room like an iron fist. He was composed, too composed, as if he had rehearsed this betrayal 1,000 times before. With slow precision, he set his cigar into the crystal ashtray, exhaling a plume of smoke that curled through the air like a serpent. "This is not up for discussion, Evelyn," he said, and just like that the decision had been made. The door had been shut. A storm raged in my chest, but I fought to keep my voice steady. I would not let him see me break. "So that's it?" I asked, my words sharp, slicing through the suffocating silence. "You'd rather hand everything over to Caleb, someone who doesn't even care, than let me prove myself? All because I'm a woman?" He didn't flinch, not even a flicker of hesitation. "This firm is for your brother to manage, Evelyn," he said firmly. "You have done well with your education, and you will make a fine wife one day. But this is not your place." A fine wife. The words felt like a slap, knocking the air from my lungs. "Caleb doesn't care about this firm, Dad," I said, my voice burning with frustration. "He's reckless. He barely scraped through community college, and he has no idea how to run a business. You know that." A sigh. A slow, condescending sigh, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Caleb will learn," my father said simply. "He is my son, Evelyn. It is his birthright. And you?" He hesitated, his voice softening just slightly. "You have other options, a future that does not involve the stress of running a firm. I am protecting you." Protecting me. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "You're not protecting me, Dad. You're holding me back." His expression hardened instantly, his authority slamming back into place. "That's enough, Evelyn," he said, voice cold. "We're done here." I stared at him for a long moment, my hands shaking beneath the desk. This was not just a rejection. It was an execution, a burial of everything I had worked for. I pushed back my chair, standing tall despite the fire in my chest. "No, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We are far from done." And then I turned and walked out of his office, my heels clicking against the marble floor. I didn't know where I was going, but one thing was clear. Vincent Calloway had just made the worst mistake of his life. What's her next move? How far will she go? Far. I stormed out of my father's office, my heels striking the marble floor like gunshots in the silence. The anger burned in my chest, but beneath it, there was something colder, sharper, determination. Vincent Calloway had just made the worst mistake of his life. As I passed through the hallway of our family's estate, I caught a glimpse of myself in the floor-length mirror, flushed cheeks, narrowed eyes, my chest rising and falling in barely controlled fury. I had spent my whole life molding myself into the perfect heir. For what? To be told I was nothing more than a daughter to be married off like some corporate transaction? I refused to accept that. "Evelyn." I stopped. My mother, Margaret Calloway, stood in the parlor, her hands stilling over a vase of fresh roses. Her delicate fingers trembled as she adjusted a petal that didn't need fixing. She had heard everything. "What happened?" she asked softly. I let out a sharp breath, trying to suppress the frustration in my voice. "He won't let me work at the firm," I said. "He's handing everything over to Caleb like some goddamn inheritance, and he expects me to just accept it." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't look surprised. "Your father," she started, her voice hesitant. "He has his ways. It's best not to push him, dear. He only wants what's best for you." I stared at her, my pulse hammering in my throat. "Best for me?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "Mom, he's throwing away everything I've worked for because I'm a woman. How can you stand there and defend that?" She looked down, her fingers still toying with the petals. "I just don't want to see you hurt, Evelyn," she whispered. "Sometimes it's easier to let things be." My heart clenched, The years of quiet submission were carved into her face like fine lines on porcelain. She had lived her entire life within the confines of this world, a silent spectator to every decision Vincent made. But I wasn't her. I wouldn't be her. I turned and walked away before she could say anything else. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my father's words replaying in my mind. It is his birthright. You will make a fine wife. You have other options. I had spent years shaping myself into the perfect heir, proving I was more than just Vincent Calloway's daughter. But none of it mattered. Not to him. So why the hell was I still playing by his rules? By morning, I had my answer. I was halfway through packing my suitcase when the bedroom door creaked open. Evelyn, what are you doing? I turned. My mother stood in the doorway, her face pale. Before I could answer, my father appeared behind her, his brows furrowed in irritation. What's all this? He demanded, stepping into the room. Where do you think you're going? Then Caleb arrived, leaning casually against the doorframe, still in his robe. He smirked. Packing for a vacation, sis? I snapped the suitcase shut and turned to face them. I'm leaving, I said simply. Since I'm not welcome at the firm, and I clearly don't belong in this family's plans, I'm going to find a place where I do. Silence. Then my father's face darkened. Don't be ridiculous, Evelyn, he said coldly. This is your home. Where else would you go? And for what? To make some sort of point? I met his gaze, unflinching. Yes, Dad, I said. To make a point, that I am worth more than being pushed aside for someone who hasn't earned a damn thing. Caleb let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You're really making a big deal out of nothing, Ev, he said, crossing his arms. You're throwing a tantrum because Dad isn't handing you the keys to the kingdom. His smug tone was the final straw. This isn't a tantrum, Caleb, I snapped. It's me taking control of my life. Something you've never had to do because everything has been handed to you. Vincent raised a hand, silencing us both. Enough, he said sternly. Evelyn, you're not leaving. You belong here with your family. I picked up my suitcase. No, Dad, I said. I belong somewhere I'm valued, and clearly, that's not here. I walked past them, my suitcase rolling behind me. My mother called after me, her voice trembling. Evelyn, please don't go, she pleaded. We can figure this out as a family. I stopped at the base of the grand staircase, turning to look at her, the woman who had spent her entire life swallowing her own voice to keep the peace. Mom, I said gently, I love you, but I can't keep pretending things will change if I stay. They won't. My father stood at the top of the stairs, watching silently. Caleb leaned against the banister, smirking like my departure meant nothing. I opened the front door and turned back one last time. When you're ready to treat me as more than just a daughter who needs to marry, well, you know where to find me? I said, my voice calm but firm. Then I stepped outside, the crisp morning air hitting my face as I shut the door behind me. For the first time in my life, I felt free, but freedom wasn't enough. I needed justice, and I would get it. She loves her mother, but refuses to be trapped. The door shut behind me, sealing me off from the life I had known. The weight of my suitcase felt lighter than the burden I had just left behind, but I wasn't just walking away. I was walking towards something, a new future, a new plan. I didn't look back as I stepped into the waiting car. No regrets, no second thoughts. For years, I had tried to earn my father's approval. That was over. He had made it clear where I stood. Now, I would make it clear where he stood. I booked a hotel in downtown Dallas, high above the skyline, far away from the suffocating estate I once called home. As I stared out over the city that I had spent years dreaming of conquering, I felt it settle inside me. The hunger for justice, Not revenge. Not yet. But something colder. Sharper. I had spent years being told to be patient, to wait my turn. I wasn't waiting anymore. By the next morning, I had a plan. Step 1. Find a firm that valued me for my skills, not my last name. I combed through every major law firm in the city. I needed a place where my name carried no weight, where I would be judged for my ability, not my bloodline. And then, I found it. Harrington and Company. A firm with a reputation for taking on the toughest cases, crushing their competition and never backing down. The very firm my father despised. Perfect. I scheduled an interview for the next day. And when I walked into that office, I was not Evelyn Callaway, daughter of Vincent Callaway. I was Evelyn Callaway, Harvard graduate, litigator, fighter. The hiring partner, Richard Harrington, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s, studied me as I presented my credentials. He was no fool. He knew my last name. He knew what hiring me would mean. "Why Harrington and Company?" he asked, tapping his pen against his desk. "With your connections, you could go anywhere." I met his gaze, unwavering. "I don't want to go anywhere," I said. "I want to be somewhere that values skill over nepotism, somewhere I can prove my worth without my father's name attached to it." A long pause, then a slow, approving nod. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless, Ms. Callaway." He smirked. "Either way, I like it. Welcome aboard." I threw myself into my work, determined to carve out my own path. Late nights, high-stakes cases, the kind of cases my father would have never trusted me with. Within months, I was handling clients that mattered: corporate giants, investors, and power players. And then, the opportunity came. It was a Friday evening when Richard called me into his office. His expression was unreadable. "Evelyn," he said, folding his hands, "there's a case I think you're ready for." I nodded, waiting. "We're representing a client in a major litigation against Callaway and Associates." Silence. The air around me turned electric. "They're suing your father's firm for negligence in a contract dispute. The stakes are enormous. This case is gaining attention." I kept my face neutral, even as my pulse pounded. "And you want me on it," I said quietly. "I want you to lead it," Richard corrected, watching me closely. It was a test, a moment of decision. If I took this case, it meant war. Not just a lawsuit, a direct strike at the empire Vincent Callaway had built. I inhaled slowly, steadying my thoughts. I had walked away from my father's world, but now I had the chance to do something more than walk away. I had the chance to take it apart. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice steady. "This isn't just business for me, Richard, it's personal." He nodded. "That's exactly why I want you on it. You know how Callaway and Associates operates. You know where the cracks are. If anyone can win this, it's you." I sat back in my chair, my fingers tightening over the armrests. This was it. This was my chance. For years, I had played the obedient daughter, the forgotten heir, the one who was cast aside. But now, I was the enemy, and I was going to bring them to their knees. I met Richard's gaze. "I'll take the case." She commits to leading a case against Callaway and Associates. Taking the case wasn't just a professional move. It was personal. For years, I had watched my father build his empire, making ruthless decisions, crushing competition, and treating power as if it was his birthright. Now, I was about to rip that legacy apart, brick by brick, case by case. But if I was going to destroy Callaway and Associates, a simple lawsuit wouldn't be enough. I needed a plan, something bigger, something that would make Vincent Callaway realize that casting me aside was the greatest mistake of his life. A firm as powerful as Callaway and Associates didn't stay at the top without getting its hands dirty. There were skeletons in that office, skeletons just waiting to be dug up. And I knew where to start. I spent every night after work poring over legal documents, public records, and financial reports. I reached out to old classmates who had once interned there, former employees who had been quietly forced out. And then I found it. A whisper of corruption. Clients who had been overbilled, contract disputes that had been quietly buried, confidential settlements that shouldn't have existed. It wasn't enough to take them down yet, but it was enough to start pulling at the thread. And I wasn't going to do it alone. I knew there was one person who would help me, if I played my cards right. I met Jonathan Reed at a private bar downtown, a quiet, low-lit place where powerful men whispered deals that never made it into contracts. Jonathan was a former senior partner at Callaway and Associates, a man my father had forced into early retirement. I knew he had a reason to hate Vincent, and I was about to give him another. He raised an eyebrow as I slid into the booth across from him. "Evelyn Callaway," he said, swirling his glass of whiskey. "I was wondering when you'd reach out." I smirked. Smart man. "I assume you know about the lawsuit," I said. "Everyone does," he replied. "It's the first real threat to Callaway and Associates in a long time. Your father is good at keeping his empire clean." I leaned forward. Not clean enough. I slid a folder across the table. His fingers brushed over it, hesitating for only a moment before flipping it open. His expression didn't change, but I saw the glint in his eyes, the look of a man who had just seen an opportunity he never thought he'd get. "This is damning," he murmured, scanning the documents. "It's just the beginning," I said. "I need more. More names, more numbers, and I think you know exactly where to find them." Jonathan closed the folder and leaned back, studying me. "And what do I get out of this?" he asked. I smiled. The satisfaction of watching Vincent Callaway finally fall. Silence. Then, he smirked. "I like the way you think, Evelyn. With Jonathan's intel and my firm's legal firepower, we weren't just fighting a lawsuit anymore. We were exposing a scandal. It started with a small crack. A client who was willing to testify that Callaway and Associates had misled them on a multi-million-dollar contract. Then another, and another, until the press got wind of it. Suddenly, Callaway and Associates wasn't just defending itself in court. It was fighting to keep its reputation intact. The headlines came fast and brutal. Callaway and Associates under investigation for fraud. Allegations of overbilling surface against top law firm. Exclusive. Former employees speak out against Callaway and Associates. And then, the real blow came. One of Callaway and Associates' oldest and wealthiest clients, a banking tycoon who had been with my father for over 2 decades, announced that he was cutting ties. It was the kind of loss a firm like Callaway and Associates didn't recover from. And I wasn't finished. The night before our next court hearing, I got a call. From him. "Evelyn." My father's voice was as steady as ever, but there was something else beneath it. A crack. A flicker of uncertainty that I had never heard before. "We need to talk." I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "Funny," I said, my voice smooth. "I seem to recall you saying we were done talking." A pause. Then, a sigh. Vincent Callaway never sighed. He never showed weakness. But now, the cracks were starting to show. And I was just getting started. She's not just winning the lawsuit. She's dismantling Callaway and Associates from the inside. "We need to talk." Vincent Callaway's voice was steady, but I could hear it, the crack beneath the surface. A hesitation. A moment of uncertainty from a man who had never once doubted his own power. I leaned back in my chair, twirling my pen between my fingers as I let the silence stretch. Let him feel it. Let him know that, for once, he wasn't in control. "Funny," I said finally, my voice smooth. "I seem to recall you saying we were done talking." A pause. Then a sigh. Vincent Calloway never sighed, but now the walls were closing in on him, and he knew it. Meet me tomorrow, noon. My office. His tone was sharper now, trying to reassert dominance, trying to pretend he wasn't a drowning man grasping for air. I smirked. I'm afraid my schedule is packed, Vincent. The silence that followed was ice cold. Evelyn, he said slowly, controlled, I am still your father. And I am still your daughter. I matched his tone, but that never seemed to matter before. I could almost hear the frustration tightening his jaw. Tomorrow, noon, my office. And then he hung up. I didn't need to hear the words to know the truth. He wasn't summoning me out of power. He was summoning me out of desperation. The next day, I walked into Calloway and Associates for the first time in months. It felt different now. Not like home. Not like an empire I had once dreamed of running. Just another dying kingdom with a king who had ruled for too long. His secretary barely looked at me as she motioned for me to go in. My father was already standing when I entered, arms folded, a storm brewing in his eyes. Shut the door, he ordered. I didn't move. I prefer it open. A muscle in his jaw twitched, but he let it go. Let's cut to it, I said, dropping into the chair across from him. You didn't call me here for a family reunion. You're losing, and now you're hoping I'll fix it. I never should have underestimated you, he admitted. The confession was shocking enough that I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? I knew you were smart. I knew you had talent, but I didn't think you had this in you. He gestured vaguely. You've been relentless, and it's costing me. I gave him a cold smile. Good. His lips pressed together. I want to make you an offer. I already knew what was coming. Drop the case. His voice was low, controlled. Walk away from this. In return, I'll give you what you wanted. Your place in Calloway and Associates, partner, full control. You'll run the firm when I step down. The golden offer. The thing I had fought for my entire life. But that was the thing about power. Once you learn how to take it, you don't need anyone to give it to you. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on his desk. That would have worked 6 months ago. I said, but now? I don't need your firm, Vincent. I have my own empire to build. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear. Evelyn, you were right about one thing. I cut him off. You underestimated me, and now it's too late. I stood adjusting my blazer. The lawsuit won't be dropped, the investigation won't stop, and when it's over, Calloway and Associates won't belong to you anymore. His fists curled at his sides. You're making a mistake. I turned to leave. No, Vincent. I glanced back. You did. And then I walked out. For the last time. The lawsuit will go on, ensuring Calloway and Associates falls. As I stepped out of Calloway and Associates, the midday sun hit my face. But it wasn't warmth I felt. It was victory. The empire that Vincent Calloway built, the one he refused to let me inherit, was crumbling. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted justice. For every time he dismissed me, for every time he told me I wasn't enough, for every woman told to sit down, smile, and let a man take what she had earned. Now, I was the one holding the power, and I wasn't done. Because this wasn't just about Calloway and Associates anymore. It was about what came next. As I walked toward my waiting car, my phone buzzed. Another firm wanted to talk. A bigger firm. A bigger opportunity. My empire wasn't just beginning. It was already rising. And this time, no one was going to take it from me. And that, my friends, is how you take back control. But the question is, what would you have done in Evelyn's place? Would you have walked away with dignity, or burned it all to the ground? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts. If you loved this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling narratives. Your support keeps these stories coming, and remember, power is never given, it's taken. See you in the next one.